Well, my journey to Islam began my senior year in college when I decided I wanted to become a Baptist preacher.
Islam is like a treadmill, and I'll talk about why that is later on in the video.
I tried to convert my Muslim friend to become a Christian. So I just read what Jesus said, and it says, well, the Father is greater than I. On the cross, my God,
John 14:28.
All of that just shouted, I'm not God.
And you know what the funny thing about this is? It's like whenever I hear Muslims quote passages like this, right? He's here quoting John 14:28, where Jesus says, my Father is greater than I. And Matthew 27, my God, why has you forsaken me? It's always interesting to me that Muslims who speak about the Bible will mention one verse or two verses, but also forget about the other verses as well, which are crystal clear. When Jesus, for example, in the end of Mark's Gospel, talked about how he was the Son of Man who would come riding the clouds, which is one way in which Jesus presents himself as God, because the one who rides the clouds in the Old Testament was God. And even in that passage he's alluding to from Daniel chapter 7, he receives all worship from all of creation.
The Bible ordered me to follow the Prophet Muhammad. When I come home, I said, I want to tell you something. I'm going to be a Muslim. And her face, hi to what?
Now, this is on a popular channel. They've got millions of subscribers, I believe, toward eternity. And they love to post this sort of stuff. So it's interesting. Like, I guess he's there alluding to, he comes home, he's telling his wife that, guess what happened today? He became a Muslim. And she's rightly looking at him like, what are you talking about? Now, let's keep going though.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Khalil Meek. Thank you for accepting our invitation. As towards eternity, we are very happy to have you with us. I want to start by asking, who is Khalil Meek, and can you tell us briefly about your life?
My name's Khalil Meek. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I grew up in a Christian family, and I wanted to become a Baptist preacher.
Now, the reason I'm stopping here first and foremost is because I just think to myself these days, you know, so many people these days, especially like it's like the taboo thing to be like, you know what, I was this and now I'm this. He says he was raised in his Christian family. Like, I want to know, and you should want to know, what does that specifically mean? When I think about that, I think to myself, like, you know what, I would say I was raised in a Christian family. And that gives you a certain idea. But as I think about this, well, my mum and dad were separated. My mum was a Christian, my dad wasn't a Christian. I lived with my dad growing up for the majority of my youth. But I would still say, you know, I was raised in a Christian home. Why? Because my mum would take us to church when we were around with her, etc. But I need more information. Like, don't just be quick to accept somebody saying, you know, I was raised in a Christian home, because that can be very murky. And on top of the fact that he says he wanted to become a Baptist preacher. So he wanted to become a preacher. So he didn't become a preacher. He wanted to become a preacher. But this video is advertised as this Christian preacher who became a Muslim.
While studying comparative religion, I embraced Islam in 1989. So 34 years ago.
34 years ago. 34 years ago. This guy became a Muslim before I was even born. And the reason that's interesting, beyond just him being a Muslim longer than I've been alive, is the fact that he said 1989. This is the time when Muslim, if you want to call it apologetics or Muslim evangelism, they call it dawah, right? We call it as Christians evangelism, they call it dawah. This was a peak time in Muslim evangelism. I want you to think about that as we go through what this guy's going to say and we think about the arguments he's making. This argument is washed out. We've heard this so many different times. I've done so many videos. There's so many other Christian creators out there who have butchered this terrible argument to death. And I'm like, you know what? This is on a Muslim channel with millions of subscribers still posting this garbage. And it helps you understand why I say Islam is like a treadmill. But I'm not going to mention why yet. Again, I'll talk about that later. He is here talking about how he became a Muslim 34 years ago. So I'm emphasizing this because I want you to realize that in the 80s, in the 90s, when Muslim evangelism, Muslim dawah was at its peak, there was no YouTube. There was none of this. So when the Muslim preacher came along and said, you know what, brother, Muhammad's in the Bible, brother. You would have thought to yourself, you know what, this was like some mind-blowing revelation. Because you may have never heard this before. And that's important. We live in a day and time today where these arguments have been played out. We've heard them so many times.
How was your life in regards to faith? What were you believing in?
I was a Baptist Christian. I believed that Jesus was my Savior and everything that goes along with that.
So you came from a religious family. What were your beliefs like?
So yeah, growing up in a Christian family, my mom, brother, and sister and I, we all would attend church on Sunday, and we'd go to vacation Bible school in the summer. And once we had a visiting preacher come to.
Okay, so far he's given us some information, right? He went to church, I guess nominally. He went to some Christian camps, etc. Okay, cool. It's better than never going to church or something along those lines, which we see so often, which is fine. That's all right. Cool.
Our church, who actually gave a presentation about hell. And it was a video production that they played on a big screen for us to watch. And they had reenacted people, you know, dying or whatever, and then angels coming and either taking them to heaven or hell, and then showing us what happened in hell. So I was like 6, 7, second, third grade at this time. And that's what scared me a lot. So
I can even attest. I remember going to church. I can't remember how old I was, but there was a play about hell, right? Which this was, I guess, I don't know how typical this is now in most churches, but I remember going to church at a young age and seeing that sort of play. And like most people, you're freaked out. You're scared. You're like, whoa, like I don't want to go to hell, etc. And for some people, that is the tipping point. For others, it wasn't. But it definitely makes you realize, like, okay, like this is serious. This isn't part of that experience. The reason I'm saying this is because part of it, when I think back to it, part of it I think is good, but part of it isn't. The good part of it is to realize from a very young age that this isn't just some flowery, rosy thing which has no consequences or no judgment or anything along those lines. But then at the same time, it should never be used as a device to just scare people into a religion, etc. and stuff like that. There always, and what I mean by that is it has to be, obviously, I believe, a bigger base than that, etc.
I became Christian that night and then went to all of my neighborhood and invited all of the kids and families to come the next day to see it again, right? To do that.
And
so it was very emotional.
And that's why I'm saying what I'm saying, because if you have a fear, for example, which triggers you into something and there's nothing else, like Christianity, for example, isn't based on hell. Christianity is based on the love of Christ and representing, showcasing that love to other people. So that's the foundation, what Jesus did for us. And we now go and replicate that like we go and love our neighbor, etc., and share the love of Jesus so they can be born again, have the same experience. So if you don't have a foundation, if you don't have a base, and you go out and do certain things, it's only a matter of time normally where that faith is going to just unravel, because it's going to be tested by actually real stuff, and you're going to realize, well, I was just scared or whatever it was, and I decided, that's it, etc. So it's important to know that.
And then as I grew up, it just became a Sunday thing. And then when I went to college, I did not practice my faith in college. My birth mother died in a car accident when I was 1.5 years old. But because of her death, there was an insurance settlement that my father got, and the kids, myself, received a insurance payment that set in an annuity, growing until I reached the age of 18. And then that money was given to me all at once. So when I was 18.
So you can pretty much tell how this story is going to go. He told us certain things he did, but he didn't really go deep into what they actually looked like. And number two, when you think about it, he said himself, as he grew older, it just became a Sunday thing. And as we all know, a Sunday Christian is not really that much of a Christian, right? And that's just being nice. Christianity has never been framed about a 1 day a week sort of lifestyle. Christianity, when done accurately and correctly and genuinely, is a 7 days a week, 24/7. You are a Christian wherever you are, whatever you're doing at all times. you are to represent. Yeah, we obviously don't always do this correctly. Don't mistake what I'm saying. But your identity as a human, the same way my identity, like I'm a man, I'm always a man. There's never a time where I'm saying to us, I'm not a man, right? As we add different things to our identity, as I became a father, I'm always a father. There's never like, oh, even if, for example, my children grow up and they're in a different country or a different place, I'm still a father. You don't say, okay, I've gone to school today, or I've gone to work to the workplace, or I'm running my business now. I'm in business mode, or I'm in etc. Like, no, Christian is just Christian is Christian. That's part of your identity, not a one day a week thing. So he says he just started living life. Obviously, he's got basically a trust fund which is waiting for him when he turns 18. He now gets it at 18, and let's continue to see what happens.
I had money, I had freedom, but I partied a lot in college.
Surprise,
I enjoyed
surprise.
my time there. But by the time my senior year came, the year I was going to graduate, I started feeling like all of what I was doing was way out of line and that I had been brought up better. So I decided that it was kind of an epiphany that I need to get back to my religious heritage. At the same time, I decided I wanted to be a Baptist preacher. So I finished my degree and planned accordingly.
All right. So now we get to the preacher, the Christian preacher stuff. So he has this epiphany, he has this moment where he's like, you know what? Yeah, I've been living life contrary to my Christian upbringing. I want to get back to that. And not only that, I want to become a Baptist preacher. He says, so he planned accordingly. What does that plan look like? It's easy to say stuff generally and then allow people's minds to fill in the gaps. What does it look like you planned accordingly? You enrolled in a seminary, planning accordingly can be as simple as you go online, Google, and say, how to become a Baptist preacher, how to become a preacher. That it could mean as simple as that. Planning accordingly could really just mean I had a thought in my mind that I want to be a Baptist preacher. That's it. We don't know what it is.
How did your journey towards Islam begin? Can you take us to those days?
Well, my journey to Islam began my senior year in college when I decided I wanted to become a Baptist preacher. I decided not to quit college and go to seminary, but to finish my degree and then go to seminary.
He had this thought, I want to go and become a preacher. But as he's having these thoughts, at the same time, he's being hit with some sort of impact from Islam, obviously, as he's saying. And it's changing the whole trajectories, to changing the whole course of his life. So again, I'm going to continue to reference this and make this clear because we're being presented this example of someone who is a preacher and they had a radical shift. And it's not to say people in that scenario don't change religion and stuff. That's not my point. But notice what's being advertised to you, etc. This is what we call false advertisement, right? Or not really meeting the mark. So let's listen, let's continue.
Because of my enthusiasm, I just started dragging all of my friends, colleagues, everybody I met into a religious conversation so that
that's good as well. Don't mistake me. Like, it's good to engage with friends and family when possible in religious conversations.
I could think about how I could practice saving people, right? The whole mission would be to convert them to Christianity. So how would I relate to other faiths and be able to convince them of Christianity? So as an entertainment, that's what I did my senior year, was just ask people, what do you believe and why? And
that's a good set of questions. What do you believe and why? It's a very simple question you can ask to pretty much anyone in the world that you meet and stir up conversation. I don't like the fact he said this was entertainment for him. And maybe you may say, I'm being a bit too excessive, but for me personally, things of faith are not a joke. They're not entertainment. These are eternal matters. So I'm not saying you can't have fun and all these different kind of things. Maybe I just give him the benefit of the doubt, but we have to be careful the reasoning why we're doing certain things. But having these conversations, if you plan to be a Baptist preacher, if you plan to be a preacher, having these sorts of conversations and dialogues makes a lot of sense.
And I would listen. Then I made friends with a Muslim. I had made friends with him earlier, but I never talked about religion. So now I asked him, what do you believe? And he said, I'm Muslim. And back in the 80s when I was in college, I didn't know what that even meant, really.
People are speaking about Islam, but at the same time, like he just says, most people don't know about Islam. This is the time when these arguments, Muhammad in the Bible, scientific miracles in the Quran, perfect preservation, all of this stuff, which most people, after Islam became very popular, like mainstream and the internet and YouTube and these sorts of things came out, those things blew up more so for more people to realize. Then, late 80s, early 90s, people didn't know this stuff.
He said, I'm Muslim, and he started telling me what he believes. And after a couple of minutes, I'm still listening, but I'm thinking in my head, you sound like a confused Christian.
Now, this is why it's interesting. Again, I'm going to continue to say this. This is the 80s, the 90s. He's hearing about Islam, and the thing he takes away from this is, this guy who's saying he's a Muslim, he doesn't really know much about, sounds like a confused Christian. This is something which a lot of Muslim preachers like to do. I've done videos on the channel responding to people like Sheikh Uthman ibn Farouk, where I will talk about how he does this. He'll try and create this symmetry. You know, Muslims and Christians, we're very much the same. We're very much the same. We're just like you. There's only little different things. And we know today, like, fundamentally, there's major differences. Major differences. But again, even still to today, which is the sad thing, most people don't understand that. Even still to this day, this argument is still made. Oh, Christians and Muslims are very similar. We're not similar. The religions are not similar. In fact, I like to say that religions in many different ways are polar opposites. The more you understand about Islam and the more you understand about Christianity, the more you see that they're not similar. They're different. Even though they have similar things they may speak about. Jesus is a common thread between both religions, but even the way Jesus is spoken about, Jesus is the main dividing line between Christianity and Islam. But there's much more than that.
I don't know what this Islam or Muslim is, but you're very close. You've almost got it down. You're that close, you know?
So think about it like this, right? Very close, very close. So let me just give you some examples. So in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, in the Bible, God is presented as a father, right? This is something which is basic and textbook all the way throughout, from the Old Testament to the New Testament. In Islam, that is the furthest thing from the truth. You are not allowed to call yourself a son of God in any way as a Muslim. You are a servant, you're a slave, and that is it. Christianity, from the Old Testament into the New Testament, God repeatedly appears in creation in physical form, appearing as a man. In Islam, this is blasphemy. This is unacceptable, right? These are two things, but these are major things. Imagine he's hearing this Muslim say whatever he's saying, and he's like, you know, you're a confused Muslim. You're really close. I've just given you two examples which are seen as blasphemy in Islam, but which are just commonplace, textbook in Christianity. So just understand what is being presented and what is reality are two different things. Don't be deceived. This is how to easily defend your faith as a Christian. God bless, and I'll see you next time. And by the way, the reason I said Islam is like a treadmill is because it will have you running and running and running, but you end up running nowhere.